Let's take a look at Night of Man. This is by Flying Pig Games. Got a new company. Component-wise, a lot of good quality stuff here in some ways. We'll go into that in a little bit. This is a review copy, so yeah, take that however you like. I was interested in the theme or the topic. I was basically offered a choice of either this or old school tactical. I usually am not too into a World War II tactical type games. I said, you know, I'm more interested in this. It's got an aliens versus humans theme to it going on, and it sounded more like my taste. Sounded like it had more room for some kind of funky stuff going on, and I like funky stuff. So anyway, what you get with this, really high quality counters, etc. A number of different boards and a few scenarios that go with them, and we'll talk about that. And of course, you'll get to see everything played through. I'll go through as many as I can cope with. I've played this first scenario a couple of times, once solo, because quite honestly the rule book didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it still doesn't. I'm still not sure how to handle some of the vehicles, etc. So we'll work through that as we get to it, but I'll try to give an explanation during the introduction of what I can understand. And I also played it with my wife, and well, it didn't go over too big with her. She was probably hoping for something with a little bit more role-playing type element, adventure type stuff in it. One of the big turnoffs for me was the rule book. Glossy, lots of pictures, you know, I don't like that kind of stuff. But beyond that, and it's kind of hard to tell with the camera, but there's an image behind, I mean, it's not hard to tell this, but there's an image behind the text. And the text is in a format, sort of a wide format, going across the page, which makes it difficult, of course. I'm used to the thin columns of the SPI style rule books. It's always a gripe for me when they take a wider format, especially with a larger book like this. It's normal size pages, but it's difficult to, and I figured out why with this one. It's difficult to just take a snapshot of what's going on in any given little section of the rules. So I can see something about this size. That's just what I'm used to from newspapers, from some of the rule books, etc. And when I'm quick trying to digest something, scanning a whole page is very difficult. Now, this may be just a personal problem, but I'll tell you one thing. My eyes had real trouble, and under this light it's not so bad, but under somewhat worse lighting, trying to read the text with the images behind it, and then with all this busyness going on. Beyond that, the rulebook itself is not always the clearest in the world. Your counters have a lot of information on them too. They're kind of busy. So you got a couple of numbers up here, and we'll go over those in a moment. So this is a targeting modifier. That's how well you can kind of hit vehicles. AP factor, armor piercing. That's how much damage you're going to do, or how much penetration you get versus vehicles. So one of the things with this is it's a card-driven game, kind of in the spirit of Combat Commander. It doesn't use the same system, but you have that, hey, let's do a tactical game where you need certain cards to be able to do stuff, and that's how this works. Well, but in addition to that, this has vehicles in it, which is kind of one of the big selling points for me. Anyway, the armor piercing factor is the damage you're going to do to that. Over here, we have little, geez, I can't remember the terms for them. These are special abilities. They're usually always on, but not always. And exceptions in the rules are kind of put in as though they're examples rather than very clear-cut things, which I think is meant that, which I think was done that way with an eye towards, hey, we're going to expand this, we're going to come out with new modules and stuff like that. But what it ends up leaving you with is this kind of, okay, are those the only examples or not? And there's a problem that comes up with the cards with this, where some of the cards specify certain aspects to them which seem to correspond with what the rules seem to say. Anyway, we'll get to this. Over here's your high explosive factor, which is really your anti-personnel damage factor, weaponry factor. And this works kind of as a combination of targeting and damage combined. Over here is your armor factor. Now this has an asterisk. That's because it's a soft target. It has no armor. It just is going to be dealt with the high explosive. Now down here is, this is the thing. So this is an ability. This is a power. Powers are things you don't normally have. There are a few cards in the game that say power on them. There aren't very many. And there's one. And the power seems to be, although this isn't completely nailed down in the rules, seems to be associated with a given action on a card. We'll talk about the cards in a moment. You have a movement factor, and the movement factor has a little movement class on it. So this is an L, it's a leg unit. You'll see some others that have other classes, mainly with the vehicles. All right, for the cards, each card has two actions on it, an upper and a lower, and you can do either one of these. Now, action isn't really the right word for it. Action is one of the options for them. You also have reactions, which allow you to react to an opponent's card. That gets kind of in the way when I'm playing solo, but, well, it shouldn't be too bad. I've been able to deal with it without the camera. We'll see how it works with the camera. And then there's support cards which allow you to help a certain action. So for example, this adds one to high explosive fire, infantry only. Well, infantry only isn't clearly nailed down. I had it as kind of all soft units, but you know, there are units that are actually called infantry, and I think that's what it meant, and my wife and I came to the decision during our play that that would apply only if you are an infantry, which actually means that you have to be the humans and you can only use it on your infantry pieces, which means it's a useless card for the aliens, unless they have some infantry I don't know about. Down here, these are normally used as randomizers, like the dice in Combat Commander. Over here is used to hits against vehicles, and then over here is used for damage against both types. And up in the upper part of it, there's possible special cases. Now, for high explosive damage, it's always in that upper part. This is a number that reflects the vehicle penetration value, basically, if I recall correctly. Scale is a small set of men. You got like 3 on a counter. That's probably meant to represent what's actually there. Maybe an individual unit or hero. Here you get a couple of armored aliens in it. Individual vehicles are on there as well. You have a bunch of counters that aren't necessarily very well explained, but you figure them out as needed. So I've got these hearts. I don't know what those are for. These numbers I've been using to mark how many turns I'm in the game. So when I start this game, I'll have the 1 out there. It's a 6-turn game. That seems to correspond correctly, but again, not really nailed out in the rules as to what you can do. So the sequence of play, well, you have a couple of player aids. One of them contains, 2 of them contain a copy of the sequence of play, kind of abbreviated version, and then some advertisement on the back, which is kind of a shame. I would rather have the advertisement on a flyer and put something that's useful for the game on the other side, but I'm not quite sure what would be neat there, except maybe some cheat sheet information that might be useful. Especially, I'll tell you what would be nice, which isn't available anywhere but in the rules. Oh look, it's a notes section where you can write on this glossy paper that does not take ink or pencil. If you've got a Sharpie, you can write on it. Bunch of scenarios here. Oh wait, we got little hearts here. Okay, they're the wound markers for this one critter. That's what they are. Okay. We're looking for it, we're looking for it, we're looking for it. Okay, here we go. So somewhere in the back of the rule book, there's a list of all the abilities. Now, I find these kind of hard to see on the counters. Again, under this good lighting, it's not bad, but when the lighting's a little iffy, my eyes aren't able to distinguish too well what these are. Of course, you can study them carefully. You're not going to have a lot of pieces on the board, so it's not going to be that big a deal. But these are only spelled out here as with the powers, and this would be a useful place to add those, you know, instead of putting some advertisement on there. It's not like people are going to be hunting over the advertisement page during the game too much unless they're really, really bored with the game. The other player aid comes with 2 pieces of information on it. One's a terrain effects chart. Again, maybe not terribly explained in the rules. Basically, each different type of movement factor is compared to each different type of terrain, gives you a movement cost for the terrain, and then any special notes that may apply to it. You have the terrain key here. Now, the terrain key is interesting because there's terrain on the map that doesn't seem to match it. So, for example, rough is this stuff, okay? Then there's this green stuff, which may or may not be rough. Over on Board Game Geek, the designer noted that, well, anything that's not an exact match for the terrain key is not, you know, it's just non-existent terrain. Well, yeah, but I don't buy that, because like building is only this shape, and I think this is a building mainly because of the red things. These red little borders around there indicate that there's some sort of line of sight obstruction in the way. This I thought was cultivated, but it's not. I guess it's some kind of little building. There's a little truck outside and some like corrugated steel stuff there, whatever. It takes a little bit of effort to puzzle out what the map means. I have no idea what this is. We thought maybe it's rubble, maybe it's something else. And again, you know, no clue. Obviously, the skeleton probably doesn't mean anything at all. I was using the green as rough terrain, but again, that seems to go against what the designer said. But on the other hand, other things seem very clearly to go against what the designer said. So take it however you like. All right, let's go to the sequence of play. So the base of the game, each player gets a hand of 4 of these cards, and you're never allowed more than 4 of those cards. Then each player will take one of these cards and put it face down in front of him as a bid for whether or not he wants for his initiative. And what you flip them over, and whoever has the highest value here. Now these values don't mean anything in your hand, and they don't seem to terribly correspond to what's on the cards in any sort of reasonable way that I can see. So this is just numbers that you have for the bidding, and pretty much you're probably going to bid a card that you don't really need more than anything else. And there might be cards you don't need. For example, if you're the aliens, in the first scenario, you don't have to worry about penetration, and you can't use the bullet storm because that's only infantry. So this is a useless card for you. It's got a nice number on it. You might as well throw this face down to bid. Anyway, you both compare. Whoever's got the highest number there gets the initiative, and they get to choose who goes first, I believe. Maybe they just have to go first. I don't remember. I think it's choose though. If there's a tie there, then you go to this number. If there's a tie there, you each play another, and that's really unlikely. You each play another card and compare those. I guess that goes on ad infinitum if need be, but it probably should not be possible. All right, whoever wins the initiative discards the card they played, and the other player gets his card back, which might be a negative, because if you're trying to throw a card you don't want, you kind of would like to get rid of it. Okay, yeah, the person who won the initiative automatically gets the first play, and he plays a card for an action, pretty much. And he can play supports on it. It can generate possible reactions to it, whatever. You play your action card, you take the actions indicated on the card, and then here's where things start getting a little funky. If you move, you probably get a moved marker. If you fire, you get a fired marker. But in some cases, you get an ops complete marker, which is a little worse than either of those, because there's some cards that allow you to convert a moved into an ops complete and take an action, or get rid of a moved or a fire, or something like that. Just some special case cards. Now, one of the other problems with the cards is there's a generally defined thing about eligible units. In the rules, it seems to imply that eligible units are the only ones who can take actions except in certain specifically accepted cases. On the other hand, this card specifically calls out, play this card to fire with an eligible unit or group of units, and it calls you to eligible unit. Whereas this part says, play this card to move a unit. It seems like there's a material difference between these two, and worse than that, there are, I believe, there are cards that are exactly the same. I don't know if there's a fire card that says that. But there are cards that are exactly the same that don't say eligible unit. And there's kind of the thought of, well, can I do these without an eligible unit because the card looks exactly like the other one except doesn't say that? Well, we decided no. The rules seem to imply that you have to be an eligible unit. The cards are just, I wish I could find one. But again, I don't know if there's a fire card that says that. But we found certain cards that specified eligible units and others that did not. Anyway, if you start the game with any end turn cards, I think they're discarded immediately. I don't know if they count against anyone. They probably should. Those get collected up, and once a certain number of these are played, the turn automatically ends. And you'll go to a certain cleanup phase where you're allowed to move some units that are out of the way. Anyway. Getting back to here, you alternate plays with the cards. So I play a card, and then I'm allowed, after I play whatever card and support I'm willing to play, and after you play any reactions that you have, I'm then allowed to discard up to 2 of my cards. Now that leaves me with less of a hand in terms of reaction cards or whatever, but there aren't that many reaction cards, so it's a good way for me to kind of cycle through the deck, getting rid of cards, and there might be reasons to do that in terms of trying to trigger end turns. At the beginning of my turn, I always draw back up the 4 cards. So the person who gets the initiative on the first play of any turn, they've already discarded one of their cards to get the initiative. Only one. If you had to play 2 cards for a tiebreaker or whatever, you only have to discard one of them your choice. So they get a bonus card at that point, and it might be an end turn, which starts processing there. Okay. So actual movement, again, standard wargaming type techniques here. You compare the type of unit to the terrain. Now this can get kind of tricky. For example, over here, hill is specified as looking kind of like this, which looks different from this, but I think this is a hill. The question is, does every space on the hill count as hill movement, or is it only moving up the slope? We decided only moving up the slope, but again, not nailed down in the rules. Could go either way by the way the rules are described, and you could make a reasonable argument in either direction, actually. It doesn't matter too much, I don't think, but as long as you're consistent. All right, so let's take a look at some of the rest of this here. Okay. So if both players pass, doing nothing, I guess, but discarding cards. Again, it's not clear whether you can discard cards if you pass, but we played that you could. If both players pass, the turn ends. Alternatively, the turn ends if you get the appropriate number of end turn cards. In the first scenario, that's 3 cards, and there's going to be 6 turns in the scenario, so you're talking 18 end turn cards over the course of the game, and there's a small amount of them in the deck. When the turn ends, you go to a special little phase called the reserve phase, where the person who had the initiative can move his units, and basically any units that are not within 3, I think, of the enemy. They have to be out of line of sight too. No closer than 3 spaces can expend up to 3 movement points. In most classes of movement, leg units only spend 2, but both have to stop as soon as they're within 3 spaces of an enemy unit. But if you're within 3 spaces, you're still allowed to move 1 space. You're just not allowed to move into the enemy's spaces. Okay. And then you do a cleanup. You remove any markers, which is basically the ops complete moves and fires. And you discard all but 1 card from your hand, and then you're each dealt a new hand, and you get to bid again on the new turn. And most of the scenarios have a turn limit, maybe all of them do. The 2 that I looked at do. All right. Special cases here. So units with a circled movement factor, like this, have the ability to transport a leg unit. And basically, if they begin in the same square but unloaded, you can load them up, and then the 2 units move at half the carrying unit's movement factors. If they start loaded, you can move half the carrier's movement factor and drop them off. You can move the entire movement factor, or you can unload, and both units activated by 1 move card can move half their movement factors. They give rules what happens if a carrier is destroyed. It does a couple of hits on the passenger. Vehicles and walkers are going to have facing in the game. And that facing is basically by the counter, so they kind of point like this. And they're able to back up. And that costs them I don't know, that's listed elsewhere. But they can also turn, and that costs them a movement point to turn a vertex, whatever a vertex may be. I believe a vertex is actually a side, because these counters get placed kind of diagonally, if I recall correctly, but we'll see. Okay. In order to fire on someone, you're going to need a line of sight to them. And line of sight is generally only blocked by these little red lines. If you're crossing a red line, but not going directly into the hex with the red line, you can't see the enemy. The exception to that involves hills. We'll get to line of sight in a little bit, because it's not covered right here. Okay. So there's two types of target you can fire against. If you're firing at soft targets, the guys with a little asterisk for an armor factor, you're going to be using high explosive values. And you designate the firing unit or units, because multiple units can fire together, and you play a fire card or whatever that works it. You calculate your HEF firing. Now your HEF firing, I know how to do this, is going to be your HEF value modified by, if I can find it, the range, which is down here. This is for AP, this is for HE. Based on the type of unit firing and the range that it's on. And any terrain effects, which will be listed here as cover factor. And then it's possible that there's additional modifiers. For example, this has this kind of hard to hit because they're armored, sort of. They don't have an armor factor, but they're harder to hit because they're personal armor, which subtracts another 1 off of it. And that indicates a number of cards that you draw. And you simply start drawing cards off the top of the deck equal to that amount. And you're looking for little hits. If you get any little hits, each one does some damage. Little hits that have an asterisk next to them, like this one, don't work on fire combat. The first hit that a soft target takes makes it a shaken unit. And that means it can't fire and it only moves half, and it's partway to damaged. If a shaken unit is hit again, it stays shaken, I guess, and gets flipped over to its damage side. And its damage side is going to have potentially worse value. So you see the HE value for this reduces. If it gets hit again while shaken and damaged, it's destroyed. So it takes 3 hits to destroy most soft targets. You have an opportunity, though, to recover either from shaken or in a somewhat more difficult manner from damaged. Okay. If you're shooting at multiple targets in a square, you can choose which target you're firing at, with the exception of artillery fire, which is just off a card. I assume it requires an eligible unit, although you could certainly make an argument that off-board artillery might not. That unit's spotting. Does it expend the unit? Well, that's a good question. We've said no, because unlike move or fire, there isn't a clear thing, but maybe it's supposed to ops complete you. And I don't know. We weren't able to find something one way or the other on that. And because of the difficulty of reading the rule book, you know, it's kind of like it's better to make up rules than to try to cope with this, because honestly, it doesn't seem like it's, you know, really trying too terribly hard to simulate something. Limit of stacking is 2 per square. That includes, I think, friendly and enemy units, which means if you want to assault someone and there's 2 of them in 1 square, you're shit out of luck. We'll see. Okay, so you can mass your HEF fire into a single action. Basically, you add up all the HEF values, but you only get modifiers for 1 unit, so if power's at play or whatever. There's opportunity fire in this game. Opportunity fire happens anytime somebody's walking through your line of sight during a normal impulse. If they expend movement points within your line of sight and within range, you're allowed to play a fire card as kind of a reaction or something and shoot them right then. And if you do any hits, you stop them in addition to any hits that you generate from that. Okay, here's the special artillery rules. A friendly unit has to have line of sight to the targeted square. You draw the number of cards. Okay, and nowhere does it say whether you become ops complete or fired or moved. We just did it as it didn't do anything. I'm not sure that's appropriate, but again, not covered and not specified on the card. So again, you get to make up your rules as you go, because the game just doesn't nail things down. If you want to move into an enemy space, and you have assault capability, which is this little dagger here, you're able to do that, and that'll use your HE factor for an assault combat. Now, some units have an assault plus, which means they get one more than their HE factor. Assault combat's going to be both players get to do an HE attack without range and without cover modifiers against each other simultaneously. Now, the exception to that is if the defender's shaken. A shaken attacker I don't think can do this. If the defender's shaken, then they fire last, which means they get hit before they get a chance to get fired at, before they get a chance to fire back. Whoever does the most hits in an assault combat wins the square, and the other guy has to retreat. The defender wins ties in this case. In order to rally a unit, you play a Rally or Bloodlust card and declare that you're rallying the unit. It has to be an eligible unit. Wow. You know, again, not spelled out in the artillery at all whether or not you have to be eligible. So there's this kind of dichotomy between, hey, should I only be paying attention to where it says eligible in the rules? What about the card? Should I only pay attention to where it says it on the card? Not nailed down nicely. But anyway, if I want to rally a unit, I can do this, and I'll be removing the shaken marker with that. And it makes the unit generally ops complete, although Bloodlust I think doesn't. In addition, a reduced unshaken eligible unit that's not in line of sight, I can use Rally or Bloodlust in order to flip the unit from damaged to undamaged. Okay, we've got the multi-level line of sight. So I talked a little bit about line of sight. Hey, red lines kind of block it. Well, the difference is if you're on a hill square, you can fire over any terrain except other hills. So only red lines surrounding other hills block hill units' line of sight. Well, what's not clear there is this another hill and is this red line blocking? I don't know. I.e., am I below the crest of the hill here in that case? Again, make a decision one way or the other. Clearly, if there was another hill over here that was an integral hill, we would look at it that way. But you know, to look at hills reasonably, they're probably not like mesas, they're not wedding cakes, so it might make sense to say this is another hill. Again, make up your rules as you like. All right, let's take a break so that I can rest my voice and get to the parts of the rules that I know less well and that I've had less struggle over but we will probably have more difficulty with. I haven't been able to get to the vehicle combat. I was hoping my wife and I would get to play it. Unfortunately, I've got Consim World Expo coming up this week. I was hoping to get more detail into this, but got so frustrated with my first play that I was just like, okay, let me try it with my wife and see where we get. She didn't like it enough to do the vehicles. So for vehicle combat, and these are these movement classes, which is pretty much everything but L. In order to first fire at a unit, you use the normal fire routine, but to hit the target, you take your AT value, your armor targeting value, which is up here. And you calculate your normal cover factor and AP range modifier. And depending, well, we'll worry about this in a moment, but if you're firing at the side or rear, you're going to get a bonus in penetration. If you end up hitting the turret, which is just a random thing that happens from here, you'll end up getting a penalty because you're hitting the more heavily armored part of the target. But that will come with your penetration. Then you draw a card and you're going to get a number. Now this number is going to be your base to hit number. You subtract your targeting modifier, that's this number here, from that, and then add the cover of the terrain. And this is how much you're going to need to actually hit. Right? So let's see. You count the number of squares. Yeah, you get your oh no. You count the number of squares. This is going to be your base to hit value. This is added to penetration. So the closer you are, the better penetration you get. Okay. So you count the number of squares, and that's going to be your to hit number. You subtract your targeting modifier up here. And that's the number you're going to try to hit. You flip a card, and if you get a number that's equal to or greater than your modified to hit number, you've hit the target. If it also says moving fire, which I guess is this MF here, the shot will miss if you were moving when you fired. If the targeting number reads a turret, you're going to be hitting the turret or some heavily armored portion, and the target's armor factor is increased by 1. Now you want to see if you destroy the target, and you draw yet another card. This is your second card drawn here, and you look at this number. You add the APF bonus in the lower right block, that's this number here, to the firing unit's armor piercing factor, modified by the range, and you get a modified APF. I hate acronyms. If the modified APF is greater than or equal to the target unit's armor factor, which will be down here on a vehicle, we'll need one that has it. Oh look, it's a 0. That looks pretty easy to hit or to penetrate. The target's simply destroyed, unless it happens to be a walker. Now, when a target's destroyed, it becomes a wreck and becomes something of an obstacle on the board. If this block says dud on it, you've missed no matter what. If it says destroy, I guess you automatically destroy. You don't have to worry about calculating the penetration. You ignore the HEF hits that are listed there. That's pretty simple. Okay, so armored units, yeah, okay. So they actually face, they do face a vertex. I got confused. When you give me pictures, I get confused. So the armored unit has 3 front hexes, or 3 front spaces, 3 back spaces. Moving into front spaces costs it its normal movement point. Pivoting a vertex costs it 1 movement point. It can reverse by paying an additional movement point for each square that it's moving. If it has the fixed weapon attribute, which is this thing, it can only fire through front arc, otherwise it's assumed to have a turret and it can fire in any direction. Move and fire allows you to pivot and fire. If you hit flank, that's where the side rear comes, you get a bonus on the penetration. Okay, now we get to more complicated stuff. Walkers and the Kaiju. Okay. Walkers are not civilians. Let's see if we can find a walker. That's a W, but that's just a truck. I thought walker would be crap, bopping things all over the place. Okay, this I believe is a walker, the cheetah. But I don't know, it says K, maybe it's a kaiju. Okay. There's only one kaiju, it's Kadamono. And he doesn't show up except in Kickstarter expansions, which I don't think I have with this set. Okay, when you have a walker, you have to build your own. You get 7 construction points to build a heavy walker, 5 to make a light walker. The Panther is a walker. That's this thing. Okay, and that's got a K on it too. And the cheetah is a light walker. Okay. And you buy these enhancements by placing the enhancement markers, and there's a bunch of these little counters here, on your walker. You can purchase less than your CPs, but never more. And they give you additional bonuses. So for example, this adds 1 to your targeting modifier. This adds 2. This absorbs a hit. Your weapons. So this gives you an APF of 6 and an HEF of 0. Now the walker itself, you can see, like this one has no targeting value particularly, and it's got no weapon inherent to it. So you're going to have to buy a weapon to go with this. You can get bonuses for the movement. Walkers are treated as vehicles, and there's also tanks and stuff like that for the humans. When walkers attack, they can fire all their weapons. Each weapon fired may fire at a different target, and each of their weapons have an APF and HEF factor, but they can only be used once in each attack. You worry about all the armor factor enhancements on the walker. If a walker takes a hit that would normally destroy a vehicle, such as a tank, you remove the top enhancement marker that displays an armor bonus. Except for the shield, which gets flipped over to the charging side when it's hit. If it's hit while the shield's on the charging side, the marker's removed. So it's a somewhat better piece of armor, sort of. Cloaking is considered an armor enhancement for this role. It's cloaking. It subtracts from the enemy's drawn hit number. Okay, so that you don't worry about. You don't get to the penetration there. Okay, if you assault a walker, the first hit shakes it, the second one takes an armor bonus away, or if there's no armor bonuses remaining, you destroy it. If you have no armor enhancements on a walker and left and it takes a hit, it's destroyed. Now, Kedamono is this huge kaiju. He does not take shakes. Every hit will either remove a wound marker or eliminate him if he has no wounds left. He buys wound markers, and there's a construct your own scenario rules for this game that since the Kedamono, I don't think I have any scenarios for it in my box. You'd be in, I assume if you buy it not Kickstarter, you don't get them. Although maybe they're online or something. You'd be able to you'd still be able to use the piece because of this. They spell out some of the card actions here. So here they actually specify some of the stuff here. So for example here, Bloodlust gives you an ops, does not mark a unit with ops complete. Fire, you always, it specifies the EU, and I think there's a card in there that doesn't say this. Well, here's one. So this one doesn't tell you whether to use a move or a fire marker on it. Maybe it says it here. There we go. An eligible unit, so it has to be eligible. Can move half its movement. It gets a penalty on firing, and then it's marked ops complete. So basically, the cards don't tell you necessarily everything you need to know, and the prior rules don't tell you. But over here, there's a compendium of it. Again, a useful thing that maybe would have gone here instead of advertising space. Whatever. Trying to see if the artillery strike. So the artillery strike doesn't seem to require an EU unit. And what that's going to do is that's going to blow up it's going to do damage to a bunch of units at once. Now, what's weird here is it doesn't specify. So an artillery strike can hit multiple squares. The way this is worded, it looks like you draw cards for each square, and it's proportioned among the units there. I'm not sure what that's what was actually meant, or if you simply draw cards, and if you're firing at multiple squares, it gets distributed among the squares. Again, one of those things that you kind of have to decide as you're playing, because the rules really don't nail it down. And that's about it. And then we get to scenarios. And what do we have here? I think it's 6 scenarios in the base game. No, more than that. 7. I got 8. It's hard to see what's going on. I think there's 8 scenarios here. Then there's a skirmish game where you can buy units and set up your own, you know, scenario of your choice. And finally, Flying Pig provides, they have a magazine of their own, something like Ya magazine or something like that. Yeah. Which presumably is going to come up with additional scenarios, maybe counters, etc. available if you're interested in, you know, picking up a house organ like that. I don't know whether or not they'll eventually be repackaged as, you know, sets for the game. One would hope that would happen. So if you're not really into all their other games, you don't have to, you know, get a subscription to or a magazine that's filled with lots of stuff that maybe isn't to your taste. Overall, well, I don't know if there's any other game in this space, so if this is interesting to you, this very low-level tactical type of combat involving aliens and funky stuff, and there's clearly an intention to make this expandable in some way, then this is certainly, you know, your best choice along those lines. We'll take a little look at how it actually plays. I hope to get at least 1 or 2 scenarios in before I run off to the con. Once I play a significant number of scenarios, certainly at least 1 or 2 involving vehicles, I'll also do a review. I may end up doing more scenarios. I may even do a purchase scenario, one of these build your own scenarios, just to get a feel for how that kind of works out as well. We'll see how much I enjoy it, you know. All right, let's send this out.